Powerful hook plus subscribe request. Stop scrolling, because what you're about to read will make every American and British viewer rethink everything they believe about strength, pride, and judging a person too fast. If you love jaw-dropping reversals, shocking plot twists, and underdog victories that punch straight to the soul, smash that subscribe button right now so you never miss another story like this again. In the heart of Detroit, inside a high-end martial arts academy filled with polished floors, spotless mirrors, and students from wealthy suburbs, a quiet black janitor named Calvin Mercer pushed his mop through the halls every night, hearing punches crack like thunder and shouts fill the air as the city's most privileged students trained under fluorescent lights. None of them knew that beneath Calvin's faded coveralls lay a past coated with broken bones, championships, and secrets buried so deep he hoped no one would ever dig them up again. But fate always has a twisted sense of humor, especially when the proud fall into the path of someone who has already risen, fallen, and risen again. And that's exactly what happened the day Damian Cole, a cocky 24-year-old karate black belt with 15 tournament trophies, noticed Calvin sweeping in the corner and smirked to his friends that he could probably beat the old janitor with one hand tied behind his back, unaware that Calvin, once a world-class mixed martial arts prodigy trained in Brazil, Japan, and South Africa, had disappeared after a scandal the media never fully understood, and had chosen a life of silence instead of spotlight, discipline instead of glory, and peace instead of violence. But Damian was desperate to go viral with a stunt, and when he announced loudly, "Hey old-timer, want to spar around? You know, just for fun." The whole gym burst into laughter, students filming, instructors raising eyebrows, and Calvin simply paused, leaning on his mop, looking up with the calm eyes of someone who had seen storms far more violent than any punch. And though he tried declining politely, saying, "Son, I'm just here to clean, no need for all that," Damian insisted, mocking him, calling him scared, calling him fragile, calling him washed up, words that didn't hurt Calvin but annoyed the head coach, Master Raines, who secretly recognized Calvin from an underground Tokyo tournament 20 years ago. Though he said nothing, eventually Calvin sighed, removed his gloves, rolled up his sleeves, and stepped quietly onto the mat while the spectators whispered, scoffed, laughed, or recorded, expecting a humiliation, but not the kind they were about to witness. At the bow, Damian smirked, confident, dancing lightly on his feet, flicking his hands, showing off, and Calvin simply breathed, still as a mountain, perfectly balanced. Then the match began, and everything changed. Damian launched a lightning-fast roundhouse kick, but Calvin leaned a centimeter and the kick sliced past harmlessly. Damian threw a flurry of punches, each faster than the last, each missing by millimeters as if Calvin could see the future, moving with a grace so controlled it looked supernatural. The room fell silent, whispers dying, phones lowering. Then in one calm motion, Calvin stepped forward, tapped Damian's chest with 2 fingers, gently sweeping his leg, and Damian landed flat on his back in total shock. Air punched from his lungs without Calvin ever truly striking him. Laughter became gasps, mockery became awe, and Master Raines loudly ordered everyone to stop recording. But Damian, red-faced and humiliated, demanded a second round, then a third, then a full contact challenge, and Calvin reluctantly accepted, promising, "I won't break anything you can't live without," and the second round became a lesson in humility. Calvin blocked strikes with effortless rhythm, redirected Damian's strongest kicks as if guiding a child, and when Damian tried a flying knee, Calvin simply moved aside and let gravity do the teaching. But the real twist came when Damian accused Calvin of getting lucky, and Master Raines finally spoke, revealing Calvin's past, that he had once defeated an undefeated Russian champion, survived a near-fatal cage match in Johannesburg, and walked away from fame after witnessing a tragic accident that made him vow never to fight for glory again. Suddenly the students' perspectives shifted. This wasn't a janitor, this was a legend hiding in plain sight. In Chapter 2 the story twists further as Damian becomes obsessed with proving himself, training secretly at midnight, stalking Calvin's past online, discovering archived footage of Calvin defeating world-class fighters with impossibly creative techniques. Damian grows resentful, jealous, convinced Calvin ruined his reputation, so he issues a public challenge at a massive charity showcase attended by 800 spectators, reporters, and live-streaming audiences from the UK and USA, claiming, "The janitor will either prove he's a fraud or admit I'm the better fighter," and the internet explodes with buzz. Calvin refuses at first, but when Damian's arrogance starts harming others, sparring partners injured, younger students bullied, tempers rising, Calvin agrees, not to win, but to teach a final lesson. In Chapter 3, the arena fills, lights blazing, crowd roaring as Calvin enters in simple clothes while Damian wears a custom gold-trimmed GI. Cameras flashing, Their fight begins not with violence but with philosophy, Calvin calmly speaking between dodges, "You chase victory, but not mastery, you chase applause, but not wisdom," frustrating Damien until he loses all discipline. Damien unleashes a wild barrage, but Calvin dismantles his offense with footwork so precise it feels like watching time slow, ending with a single clean sweep, gently placing Damien on the mat as the audience rises in stunned silence. Then Calvin helps him up, whispers something unheard by cameras, and walks away forever. Damien breaks down, apologizing publicly, becoming a changed mentor who later rebuilds the gym around humility and respect. And the final twist. Calvin disappears until months later when a viral video shows him teaching disciplined street kids martial arts in an abandoned Detroit warehouse, giving them the path he once lost, from violence to purpose, from pain to peace, proving that the strongest warrior is the one who chooses to protect, not to boast. And that is why everyone who witnessed what happened the day a black belt challenged a humble janitor still says they saw something unforgettable, something that left them speechless, something that reminded the world that greatness often hides in the people society overlooks every day. Chapter 2 began with a heavy tension settling over the academy in the days after the unbelievable sparring match, because the students who once mocked Calvin for being just the janitor, now stared at him with a mixture of awe, embarrassment, guilt, and curiosity, whispering stories to each other about his legendary past as though he were a myth walking among them. But while the students grew more respectful, Damien Cole, bruised ego hidden behind forced grins and overconfident laughter, spiraled into a sleepless obsession that ate at his pride every night like acid, because every time he closed his eyes he saw himself falling, saw Calvin moving effortlessly like a ghost, saw the crowd's stunned silence, saw the instructors exchanging knowing looks, and felt the humiliation burn deeper than any injury he had ever sustained. And instead of letting the experience humble him, Damien twisted it into fuel for resentment, telling himself Calvin must have used dirty tricks, or that the old man took advantage of him looking unprepared, convincing himself that he could beat Calvin, for real, under proper rules, in front of a proper audience, with full contact permission, and with his reputation on the line. So Damien started training alone in the late hours of the night when the gym was nearly empty, pounding heavy bags until they swung dangerously high, sparring with imaginary opponents, practicing every strike he imagined Calvin could counter, watching grainy footage of old underground tournaments until sunrise painted the padded floors orange. He researched Calvin's name obsessively, typing, "Calvin Mercer fighter, Calvin MMA Tokyo tournament, Calvin vs Ivan Petrov," scrolling through forums, old news clippings, and niche fight blogs that still whispered about the mysterious American fighter who disappeared after a controversial match in Johannesburg where an accidental injury had left another fighter hospitalized. A moment Calvin blamed himself for even though investigators cleared him of fault. The more Damien learned about Calvin's past, the more the truth twisted his pride into a dagger stabbing the same wound. Calvin was not a lucky janitor who embarrassed him. He was a master, a ghost of brilliance Damien had mocked without realizing he was provoking a sleeping dragon. Yet instead of respecting that legacy, Damien grew angrier, convinced he needed to reclaim his dignity by defeating Calvin publicly. So he designed a plan. He would host a massive charity martial arts showcase to benefit youth self-defense programs across Detroit, inviting fighters, sponsors, local media, and streamers from the USA and UK, and then, during the event, challenge Calvin to a formal, regulated, crowd-witnessed match that would force the truth out. Damien believed Calvin would decline and look scared, or accept and finally lose, either way giving Damien the victory he craved. And so he went to the academy's management, pitching the event with smooth-talking charisma and promises of publicity, donations, and exposure, all while pretending to be humble and community-minded. The academy loved the idea and cleared it instantly. Posters went up, social media announcements rolled out, hype built fast, especially after Damien paid a friend to leak a clip of the initial sparring match from an illegal recording taken before Master Rains stopped the phones editing it misleadingly so it looked like Calvin pushed Damien while he was off balance, implying the victory wasn't legitimate. Comments exploded online, with people arguing whether Calvin was skilled or whether Damien simply slipped. And when Calvin found out about the showcase, he remained calm, sweeping the lobby floor while people whispered around him. But Master Rains confronted Damien privately, accusing him of stirring trouble and dishonoring the academy. Yet Damien insisted, the community deserves the truth, twisting the narrative until even some students believed him. But Calvin himself avoided confrontation entirely, refusing interviews, ignoring whispers, trying to keep his promise never to fight for glory again. However, everything changed one night when Calvin witnessed Damien shouting at a young beginner, a shy 13-year-old boy named Malik who looked up to Damien and wanted advice. Damien, stressed and tired, snapped at the child for asking a simple question, calling him slow and weak, shoving his shoulder, making the boy tear up. Calvin immediately stepped forward, placing a firm hand on Damian's wrist, saying in a calm, unshaking voice, "A leader doesn't break the young, he builds them," and Damian jerked away, shouting, "Stay out of my business. You're just the janitor." Loud enough that the entire gym fell silent, Malik ran off crying, parents glared, and for the first time, Calvin felt anger stir, not for himself, but for the boy. Later that night he found Malik in the hallway, sitting alone with red eyes, blaming himself for messing up. Calvin knelt beside him, moved his mop bucket away, and said softly, "When I was your age, someone said worse things to me. But I learned something important. The loudest man in the room is usually the most afraid," giving Malik the same advice Calvin once received from his Brazilian coach years ago. And that moment, seeing how Damian's pride hurt others, changed everything. Calvin realized that walking away again would only let Damian's arrogance continue poisoning the younger generation. So, the next day, when Damian approached him in front of the entire gym with cameras rolling in a fake respectful tone, saying, "Mr. Mercer, will you honor us by participating in the charity exhibition?" Calvin looked at him with steady eyes and answered simply, "If it will teach the right lesson, then yes." Shock waves rippled through the room, students whispering, instructors holding breath, Damian grinning triumphantly because he thought he finally had Calvin trapped. And so the preparations for the event intensified, the arena rented out, bright banners hung, announcers rehearsed lines, sponsors arrived, and even local Detroit news stations confirmed coverage, with UK fight bloggers planning to stream reactions. Meanwhile, Damian trained even harder, angry at Calvin's calmness, telling himself he would win because he deserved it, while Calvin spent nights quietly mentoring kids like Malik behind the scenes, teaching them patience, discipline, and real martial arts philosophy with movements so fluid and powerful the kids thought he was magic. But the deeper twist came 3 days before the event, when Calvin received a message from a name he hadn't heard in years, Ivan Petrov, the undefeated Russian champion he once defeated, the same fighter whose injury in Johannesburg had driven Calvin into exile. Ivan sent a video message saying, "Old friend, I heard you are fighting again. You have nothing to prove. You walked away because your heart is too big for violence. Don't destroy yourself for a boy's ego." But Calvin replied simply, "I'm not fighting to win. I'm fighting to teach." And with that silent determination, the stage was set for one of the most unexpected, unforgettable confrontations the martial arts world would discuss for decades, culminating in the packed arena of Chapter 3, where the true meaning of strength, physical, emotional, and spiritual, would finally be revealed. Chapter 3 arrived like the calm before a storm, with Detroit's skyline shimmering under the arena lights as the charity showcase drew a crowd so large the organizers had to open overflow seating, and inside the building the air buzzed with excitement, murmurs, speculation, and a tense electricity that made the floor vibrate beneath the feet of the hundreds who'd come to see whether the legendary Janitor was truly a ghost of greatness or whether Damian Cole, the young black belt whose confidence bordered on delusion, would reclaim his bruised pride in front of a roaring audience. Families settled into their seats, kids held homemade signs reading, "Team Damian," or "Go Calvin." Influencers from the USA and UK clutched their livestream devices, narrating to thousands watching worldwide, while backstage Calvin Mercer sat quietly on a folding chair, wearing a simple gray t-shirt and loose training pants, not warming up, not practicing, simply breathing slowly, eyes closed, as if he were centering his entire soul. Meanwhile Damian paced like a caged animal, veins tense, heart pounding, gloves clenching, his custom gold-trimmed GI blinding under the fluorescent lights as he shadowboxed furiously, convinced he needed to strike early and hard to destroy Calvin's mystique. And as announcers hyped the event, calling it the Battle of the Hidden Master versus the Modern Champion, the students from the academy gathered ringside, a mix of fear, excitement, admiration, and loyalty to both men, though many now quietly rooted for Calvin, who had treated every one of them with kindness even when they'd mocked him. Then the moment came. The announcer's voice boomed, "Ladies and gentlemen, our main event of the night." And Damian stormed out, confidence plastered across his face, crowd cheering wildly, lights flashing, music pulsing. But when Calvin stepped through the curtain, humble, silent, composed, something shifted in the room. People straightened in their seats, phones lowered, and even the rowdiest spectators quieted as if sensing they were witnessing history about to be rewritten. The referee explained the rules. Semi-contact but competitive, points for clean strikes, no grappling submissions allowed unless controlled. Rules Calvin heard without reacting, rules Damian planned to exploit with speed and aggression. The fighters bowed, the bell rang, and Damian exploded forward with the fury of every sleepless night he'd spent training, unleashing a blistering combination of spinning kicks, lunging punches, and acrobatic attacks that would have overwhelmed almost any fighter in his age group. But Calvin moved with a rhythm so fluid it felt like watching a poem unfold, He didn't dodge violently but simply wasn't where Damien struck, sidestepping at the last inch, tilting his torso just enough for fists to slice air, redirecting kicks with soft taps of his wrist, never counterattacking, never striking back, simply letting Damien burn energy like a wildfire devouring its own fuel. The crowd gasped, commentators whispered, UK streamers shouted in disbelief, and Damien's frustration skyrocketed until he roared, "Stop running and fight me." But Calvin answered calmly, "I am fighting you, just not the way you expect," which enraged Damien even more. Then Damien tried a risky flying elbow, legal in this exhibition but dangerous, and Calvin caught him midair, gently guiding him downward, setting him on his feet without harm, an act so controlled it sent shockwaves across the arena. Damien swung again, chaotic and desperate, but Calvin stepped inside his guard and whispered, just loud enough for Damien to hear, "Fighting isn't about proving you're better. It's about proving you're in control of yourself." Then tapped Damien's knee with precise timing, making him stumble, not hurt, just off balance. Embarrassed, sweating, and furious, Damien grabbed Calvin in a wild attempt at a takedown, even though grappling wasn't allowed, and for a split second Calvin's old instincts flashed. His body remembered championships, wars, the brutal cage match in Johannesburg, but instead of punishing Damien, he exhaled, softened his shoulders, and used Damien's momentum to roll him gently onto the mat in a perfect, harmless sweep. The referee separated them, the crowd murmuring in awe, and Damien, panting and trembling, realized the truth. Calvin could have destroyed him at any moment, yet chose not to, and the crushing weight of that truth broke something inside him. Trembling, he tried one last reckless spinning kick, and Calvin finally, not out of anger but mercy, executed a movement so elegant the arena seemed to freeze. He stepped forward, pivoted, tapped Damien's ankle with his heel, and Damien fell. Not violently, but gracefully, landing on his back as if the earth itself cushioned him. For a long moment the world stopped moving, then Calvin extended his hand, helping Damien stand, and in front of the massive crowd Calvin leaned close and whispered words only Damien heard. "The person you're fighting isn't me, it's the part of yourself you're afraid to face." Damien's eyes filled, pride shattering, ego dissolving under the kindness of a man he'd tried to humiliate. And when the referee raised Calvin's hand as the clear victor, Calvin immediately gestured for Damien's hand to be raised too, telling the microphone, "Tonight wasn't about winning. It was about learning. We all walk different paths, but humility keeps us from losing ourselves." And the arena erupted in applause so loud it shook the rafters. Reporters swarmed, but Calvin slipped away through a side exit, vanishing into the night before interviews could trap him back into a spotlight he'd sworn off. Damien stood in the ring alone, tears streaking his face, and in front of thousands he apologized, admitting his ego blinded him, promising to rebuild himself not as a showman but as a true martial artist. And he kept that promise, later transforming the entire academy into a youth mentorship center built around discipline and respect. But the final twist came months later when videos surfaced online, showing Calvin teaching martial arts to underprivileged kids in an abandoned Detroit warehouse, guiding them with patience and wisdom, shaping future champions not of tournaments but of life. And former students who visited him describe the same scene every time. Calvin sweeping the floor first, as if to remind himself where he came from, then teaching the kids moves powerful enough to shake their destinies. And so the legend of the janitor who defeated a black belt grew not because he fought, but because he chose peace over violence, humility over pride, purpose over glory. And everyone who witnessed that unforgettable night still says the same thing. "I didn't just see a fight. I saw a lesson. I saw a transformation. I saw what true strength looks like."